The chamber was packed tighter than usual, with reporters lining the back walls, their pens scratching quickly across notepads and cameras whirring to capture every gesture, every flicker of expression. Everyone knew tension was running high, but no one could have predicted that Andy Biggs would decide to take the risk of going directly after Jasmine Crockett. His voice, low and biting, cut through the usual procedural monotony as he leaned closer to his microphone, narrowing his eyes as if he were about to unveil a revelation. Instead of addressing the policy points before the committee, he aimed his remarks directly at her, casting doubt on her intelligence, as though dismissing her mind would somehow strengthen his own arguments. The words carried a smugness that felt rehearsed, as if he had planned this moment, rehearsed it in the mirror, convinced it would leave her flustered. The atmosphere shifted immediately. A collective tightening of shoulders could be seen around the dais, staffers looked up from their laptops, and a few members exchanged wary glances. The insult was clear, unmistakable, and completely unnecessary. But Biggs's expression suggested he believed he had struck a blow, that he had landed a hit that would reverberate and throw her off balance. It was the kind of tactic that depended not on logic but on theatrics, on the assumption that if you demean your opponent in front of an audience, you strip them of credibility. Yet Jasmine Crockett did not falter. She didn't even blink. She sat there with the kind of poise that seemed almost rehearsed, though it wasn't. It came from something deeper, an internal composure that had been forged in countless battles, both inside and outside the chamber. For a few long seconds, she let the insult linger in the air, unchallenged. The silence felt heavy, stretching far longer than anyone expected, and in that silence, Biggs's words began to turn on him. What had been intended as a confident jab now hung awkwardly, like a cheap shot that missed its target and left its wielder exposed. Crockett slowly leaned forward, folding her hands neatly in front of her, her eyes never leaving his. The quiet strength of her body language was enough to command the attention of the entire room. She could have lashed out immediately, matching his tone with fire of her own, but that would have given him what he wanted, a spectacle of heated tempers. Instead, she chose patience, letting the moment ripen until the anticipation itself became unbearable. By the time she finally opened her mouth to speak, everyone was leaning slightly forward, waiting, ready. Her voice came out smooth, steady, and deliberate. There was no sign of anger, no quiver of frustration, only clarity. She began by acknowledging his words, not to validate them, but to shine a spotlight on the tactic itself. With a precision that felt surgical, she explained that when one has no facts to stand on, the temptation is to attack the intelligence of others. It was the oldest trick in the book, she said, and one that revealed far more about the speaker than the target. Her words cut without cruelty, exposing the hollowness of his remark while holding herself above the pettiness of the insult. Biggs's smirk faltered almost instantly. He had expected her to bristle, to lash back with indignation, but instead, she dismantled his approach with a calm authority that made his words look weak, even childish. And then she pivoted, seamlessly transitioning from addressing his insult to laying out the actual points of policy under discussion. She cited facts, dates, and precedents, weaving them into a coherent argument that not only displayed her depth of understanding but also underscored the absurdity of suggesting she was anything less than sharp. As she spoke, the balance of power in the room visibly shifted. Her colleagues nodded along, some even allowing small smiles to creep across their faces, not because they were entertained, but because they were witnessing a masterclass in composure under pressure. The more she spoke, the smaller Biggs seemed, his earlier swagger evaporating into a stony silence. He had taken his shot, but now he was reduced to sitting there, lips pressed thin, with no clear path to recover without making himself look worse. The press in the back of the room scribbled furiously, sensing that this was the kind of exchange that would dominate headlines. The visual alone, a seasoned lawmaker trying to belittle a younger colleague, only to be dismantled with one perfect, measured response, was too powerful to ignore. Crockett didn't just defend herself, she elevated the conversation, reframing the moment as one about substance versus spectacle, facts versus insults. Even those in the chamber who were usually opposed to her politics couldn't deny the elegance of what had just unfolded. It was impossible not to respect the way she held her ground. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't let emotion overtake her words. Instead, she relied on what could not be dismissed: preparation, intellect, and a sense of dignity that made his jab seem cheap and desperate by comparison. When she finally leaned back, her point made, the silence that followed wasn't awkward this time, it was reverent. Everyone knew the exchange was over, that Biggs had no comeback that wouldn't make him look smaller still. His attempt to question her intelligence had backfired spectacularly, not only failing to diminish her but solidifying her standing as someone not to be underestimated. Her expression softened into the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of reassurance, as if to say she had never doubted where she stood. The energy in the room had changed. What began as a confrontation had transformed into a moment that would be replayed and remembered, a moment where composure defeated arrogance, where a single precise response carried more power than 100 barbed remarks. Biggs shifted uncomfortably in his seat, staring at the stack of papers in front of him as though hoping they might offer him a way out. But there was no escape, no recovery. The damage was done, and everyone present knew it. The aftershocks of the exchange rippled through the chamber long after the gavel moved the discussion forward. Biggs sat still, his jaw tight, his papers shuffled with unnecessary force, pretending to be absorbed in the next witness testimony. But the truth was written across his face. He had miscalculated, underestimated Jasmine Crockett, and now he was struggling with the humiliation of having been dismantled in front of colleagues, cameras, and a national audience. The smug certainty he carried into the room had been replaced by a restless stillness, the kind that came when one knew the narrative had slipped away beyond retrieval. Crockett, in contrast, carried herself with remarkable composure, almost as if nothing unusual had happened. She didn't gloat, didn't press her advantage. Her restraint made the moment even more powerful, because it reinforced that she hadn't spoken to win applause or to score points. She had spoken to defend truth and her dignity, and then moved on to business. That quiet return to focus made Biggs look all the more petty, as though he had come armed for a schoolyard brawl while she had come prepared for serious work. The journalists in the back of the room were already crafting their leads in their heads. Crockett turns insult into triumph, one thought. Another scribbled the phrase, one perfect response, with 3 underlines, knowing the clip would go viral by evening. Staffers exchanged subtle glances, and a few even shared knowing smirks. It was rare to see a moment so clear-cut, a clash where the line between substance and spectacle was so starkly drawn. Biggs's allies remained quiet, choosing not to intervene, even they knew that trying to shield him now would only worsen the optics. As the hearing adjourned hours later, the true weight of the exchange began to settle. Reporters rushed forward, microphones extended, their questions aimed like darts. But Crockett navigated the media swarm with the same calm she had shown in the chamber. She didn't boast about her response, didn't revel in Biggs's discomfort. Instead, she reiterated the importance of focusing on the issues, highlighting the need for honesty, clarity, and civility in discourse. Her refusal to frame the encounter as a personal victory made it resonate even more. It wasn't about her winning and him losing, it was about elevating the standard of conversation. Biggs, on the other hand, exited quickly, flanked by aides who moved with an urgency that betrayed their anxiety. He muttered a brief, clipped dismissal of the moment when asked for comment, insisting it was nothing, that he had simply been misunderstood. But the cameras caught the stiffness in his tone, the strain in his eyes. The soundbites lacked conviction, and the reporters could sense it. By the time he reached his car, his staffers were already huddled over phones, fielding calls and bracing for the flood of headlines that would define the day. Meanwhile, on social media, the clip of the exchange spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it was trending, not just among political commentators but across broader audiences. People who had never followed committee hearings were suddenly captivated, watching the moment Biggs's insult backfired. Memes popped up almost instantly, juxtaposing his smirk with the stunned silence that followed her response. Hashtags formed, amplifying her words and turning them into rallying cries. The narrative was no longer confined to the chamber, it had spilled into living rooms, offices, and coffee shops across the country. Crockett's supporters celebrated the elegance of her response, calling it a blueprint for how to deal with disrespect in professional settings. Educators shared the clip with comments about teaching students the power of composure. Community leaders praised her as a role model, someone who demonstrated that intelligence and preparation speak louder than insults. Even those who didn't share her political views acknowledged the strength of her presence, admitting, sometimes begrudgingly, that she had handled herself with remarkable skill. Biggs's base tried to reframe the exchange, suggesting that he had merely been pressing her hard, that her reaction was overblown. But the footage itself undermined those defenses. The insult was clear, the contrast undeniable. Every attempt to spin the narrative only drew more attention to the fact that he had initiated a personal attack and been undone by it. The more his allies spoke, the more defensive they sounded, as though even they were unsure how to rehabilitate the moment. Inside the Capitol, whispers spread. Lawmakers are not immune to gossip, and this incident provided plenty. Some privately expressed satisfaction, noting that Biggs had long leaned on condescension as a tactic and that it was about time someone turned it back on him. Others cautioned against underestimating Crockett in the future, realizing that beneath her calm exterior was a sharpness that could pierce through any attempt at diminishment. For staffers and interns watching from the sidelines, it became a kind of legend in the making, the kind of story that would be retold in hushed tones for years to come. Back in her office, Crockett gathered with her team, who were practically buzzing with energy. They congratulated her, replaying the clip, laughing at the timing of her response and the look on Biggs's face. But she tempered their enthusiasm with a reminder, the work wasn't about viral moments. "We're here to serve, not to trend," she said with quiet firmness. Still, even she acknowledged privately that sometimes the right words at the right time could carry power far beyond a single hearing. Her aides nodded, inspired not just by her intellect but by her humility. As night fell, television pundits dissected the encounter. Some praised her for standing her ground with elegance. Others speculated about the impact it might have on her rising profile, wondering aloud if this was the kind of moment that could catapult her onto the national stage. Biggs's performance, by contrast, was described as a misstep, a lapse in judgment that revealed more about his own insecurity than about her abilities. The contrast was drawn again and again, each retelling cementing the narrative deeper into public consciousness. In homes across the country, ordinary people watched the clip on their phones, nodding with satisfaction. Many saw in Crockett's response a reflection of their own experiences, times when they had been dismissed, underestimated, or spoken down to. Her composure felt like vindication, proof that dignity and intellect could triumph over arrogance. She became, for that night at least, not just a lawmaker in Washington but a symbol of resilience, a reminder that one perfect response could silence even the loudest detractors. Biggs ended his night isolated, replaying the exchange in his mind, wrestling with the sting of having been so publicly outmaneuvered. He told himself it would blow over, that news cycles were short, but deep down he knew the truth. Some moments linger, etched into memory, replayed endlessly, impossible to escape. And this, he realized, was one of them.